There are a lot of evangelicals who will recoil at the idea that there's an interfaith effort behind The Chosen. Would you have expected there to be more pushback from church members on the show that is, from a writing standpoint and from a directorial standpoint, coming from a Protestant evangelical view? Hello, Saints. My name is Jeff. I am a pastor in Utah, exploring everything I can about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I want to talk about The Chosen, which is why I have my friend with me again, Dr. John Hilton from Brigham Young University. Thanks for being here.
So great to be here, Jeff.
So one of the reasons why I want to have Dr. Hilton with us is because Latter-day Saints and evangelicals alike are flocking to The Chosen, and you have spent so much time not only just watching them from an entertainment standpoint, but also pulling together resources. You're a wealth of information, even when it comes to the production side of it. So I have some questions for you that I'd like to ask, since I've not seen The Chosen all the way through. I've seen a few episodes here and there, but I'd love it if you could just give me insight, not only from what you know from a production standpoint and just how The Chosen has come about, but also from an interfaith standpoint. I think it's going to be really interesting and fun, because I know that there's a stigma attached to The Chosen production, being that there is an interfaith collaboration taking place to make it happen. So I've got some questions, and hopefully you'll be able to answer some of those for me.
Let's go.
All right, so just give me a little bit of an insight into the background behind sort of the interfaith collaboration that's taking place when it comes to the production of The Chosen.
So, of course, the director and the principal person behind The Chosen is Dallas Jenkins, who's an evangelical. The lead actor, Jonathan Rumi, is a devout Catholic. And then there are several Latter-day Saints who have played a role. Daryl Eves was a co-founder of The Chosen with Dallas Jenkins. He's a Latter-day Saint. Brad Pillow, current president of The Chosen. The Harmon brothers with VidAngel. So there's lots of Latter-day Saints who are involved in helping to produce The Chosen. And I think it's interesting because you can look at this in different ways. There are people of other faiths and people of no faith at all that are part of The Chosen. And some people view this with suspicion. I think Dallas Jenkins has said that there's evangelicals who have criticized him, saying, hey, you're turning this into a Mormon show. There are Latter-day Saints who have criticized Dallas Jenkins, saying, hey, this is an evangelical show. I was reading on a Catholic website, and the woman who was writing the article, she's like, this is a Trojan horse for evangelicals and Mormons to creep their way into Catholicism.
Interesting.
So there's different ways you can view things with kind of a hermeneutic of suspicion, and I mean that in a negative way, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm looking at this like, oh. In fact, just there's this one person on Instagram who every time I make a post will always kind of tear me down and say, oh, I hate your faith, you believe a false gospel. And so I was trying to deflect that, and I wrote back and I said, do you like The Chosen? Hoping we could maybe have like a harmonious conversation. And he commented back this morning, he or she, I don't know who, and said, no, The Chosen is a Mormon show.
Oh, interesting.
And so it is interesting that what actually is, I think The Chosen is a great model of interfaith collaboration, and how you can have a Catholic, an evangelical, a Latter-day Saint. It almost sounds like a joke, right? But you can have these different people come together and produce a spectacular show that has more than 200 million viewers. Episodes have been viewed nearly 1 billion times. Through the incredible work of the Come and See Foundation, it's already been translated into 60 languages. That's more than the Game of Thrones. That's more than any other show, and it's going to be translated into 600 languages.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, the reach that it has had. And that's one of the reasons why I find myself leaning into this conversation, just because the criticisms that The Chosen get, I mean, those are the same criticisms that I get on a daily basis when it comes to any sort of interfaith gesture. And for probably a lot of understandable reasons, right? I mean, when it comes to faith, I mean, just that word alone, it's tied to trust. Faith and trust are almost interchangeable. And many of us have different experiences when it comes to how that trust has been brokered in our respective faith contexts, and how it's maybe been abused, how some people who have left a certain faith and joined another faith carry with them baggage, from that former faith, or how some of us who have stayed within our faith context have baggage about the faith context that we're currently in. So it makes sense that when it comes to a portrayal of Jesus Christ himself and the Gospels and the Bible, when you're getting, well, Catholics have extra books of the Bible, and, Latter-day Saints believe in ongoing revelation, and the Jews don't even believe in the New Testament. And, evangelicals have, all these different convictions when it comes to a hermeneutical responsibility behind how we convey the scriptures. It makes sense why there's going to be some pushback there. But if I may just give my opinion on that, like one of the things that has kept me centered on Hello Saints, and I have to think for someone like Dallas, who is also an evangelical, who's in this sort of interfaith space, so I'm only speaking from my context, is that yes, it is important that we remain honest within our convictions, not to the extent that we're gatekeeping, we're the only ones that have it right, everybody else has it wrong. But within the honesty of our convictions, to still recognize that Jesus himself came to transcend religious demarcations. Now, that's not to say, and I don't want to get in trouble from too many evangelicals here. I'm not necessarily saying that from a universalistic standpoint, but at the same time, he was willing to step outside of religious expectations, cultural, ethical guidelines or expectations, spoken or unspoken, when he was challenging the Pharisees, when he was defending himself to the scribes, when he was having conversations with Samaritans, right? So I think that's one of the things that I personally am appreciating about The Chosen is the courage. And yes, it's risky, and yes, I get that it can be controversial, but the courage to say, let's rise above the, and I don't mean this in a negative sense, what can be the cloud cover of a religious context, and to see Christ above our religious context. And I find that to be a pretty powerful thing, even though I understand that it's difficult for some.
It reminds me of John chapter 12, where Jesus says, when I am lifted up on the cross, I will draw all people unto me.
100%.
I think that's what The Chosen is trying to do. It's trying to lift up Jesus Christ. And they're not trying to build a fan base for The Chosen. They're trying to draw people to the Savior. So wherever you're coming from, let's draw closer to Jesus Christ. And I think that's something that evangelicals, Latter-day Saints, Catholics, Seventh-day Adventists, they can all get behind.
Sure. So then going back to some of the production side of things, I know very little about it. In fact, I, at one point, had the understanding that it's filmed 100% in Utah and that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints provided all of the set pieces and all the production, only to find out that a lot of it is actually filmed in Texas.
Yep.
Is that right? So I know very little about that. I know about Dallas. I know about Daryl Eves, but just the people behind it and how it all came together. What can you tell us about that?
So this is a fascinating story. Buckle up, because it's a little bit of a long story, but it's a great one. And let's start this story back in 2011. So this is way before The Chosen ever gets started. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has built a large film set in Goshen, Utah, a little over an hour south of Salt Lake City. And the goal behind this set is to film a series of Bible videos that the church filmed and released. And in our faith tradition, we have what's called a dedicatory prayer. When there's a major building, there's a special dedication. And at the Goshen site in August of 2011, Elder Bednar of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles offered the dedicatory prayer. And I wanted to quote it. In the prayer, he said, "We also ask thee to bless other believers in the film industry, that they will be touched and influenced to inquire how this set might be used to further goodness and righteousness through the earth." So from the very beginning, as part of that dedicatory prayer, there's an interfaith hope and opportunity being expressed. Well, flash forward to December of 2017, Dallas Jenkins releases The Shepherd, which I know you've seen.
Yeah.
And it became a pilot episode for season 1 of The Chosen. That's when a lot of people like Daryl Eves get involved, the Harmon brothers. They start raising money using crowdfunding. And in the spring of 2019, the first few episodes of season 1 are released. And it doesn't immediately take off and become a sensation, but people do start watching it. And season 1 was filmed almost entirely in this very small set in Weatherford, Texas.
Okay.
And I actually went there this past summer. You can walk around the perimeter of the set in about 2 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And if you've ever noticed in season 1, it all takes place in Capernaum. And there's some kind of what we might call Bible mistakes, right? Jesus and Nicodemus have this great conversation in Capernaum in The Chosen, but it's really supposed to be in Jerusalem. And this is part of the issue. They don't have a ton of money. They can't go out and build this incredible set. So they're using this pre-existing site, but they've basically filmed every square inch of it. And as they're starting now to think about season 2, they need a bigger set. So they're working on different possibilities. A lot of Jesus films are filmed internationally, so they're looking at these possibilities, and all of a sudden, we got COVID. Now, for The Chosen, COVID turns out to be, in some ways, almost a blessing because it becomes available for free. Lots of people are home with nothing to do. They start watching The Chosen, and now The Chosen really starts taking off.
Interesting.
But the money is still not there to create a new set, and the set's not there. So there have been a few conversations between people who know about The Chosen and the church to say, hey, could we use this set? And while probably that was theoretically possible, up to that point, the church had never licensed the use of the set to any other entity. Plus, it was COVID.
Right.
So that takes us to June 1st, 2020. A guy named Brad Pillow wakes up with this impression from the Holy Spirit. Now, at the time, Brad, he owned a company that was purchased by Bonneville Corporation. Bonneville Corporation is a media corporation owned by the church, and it had stewardship over the Goshen site. So Brad had been aware of some conversations, and he felt impressed to call one of his friends who was working with The Chosen to say, have you had any luck getting the Goshen site? And the friend says, no, and we really need help. So Brad says, let me see what I can do. He doesn't have direct control over it, but he knows a few folks. A couple days later, Dallas Jenkins and Daryl Eves are in town, and they and a few other people go to the Goshen site. And while they're there, Dallas is blown away. He actually made a video of himself talking into his phone on that day saying, I don't know yet if we're going to be allowed to film here, but if we are, we're going to do something that will bless millions of people.
Wow.
So you know how things work in life. You pray, you work hard, and everything works out, right? So actually, no. They go through all the channels. Bonneville Communications says, nope, sorry, it's COVID. You can't film.
Okay.
So when we get to July 1st, the situation is pretty dire because The Chosen was hoping to film season 2 in 2020, but it takes a long time to arrange all the production. And if you don't have a set, you can't do that. So they've got only a few days to decide, do we cancel season 2? And if they have to fundraise to build a giant set,
it's going to take a minute.
It's going to take years. Yeah. So in the middle of all this stress and pressure, Dallas releases a video, and you can still find it on YouTube. It's called I'm in a Tough Spot. And it's really beautiful. He opens up his heart. He's on this farm where he goes for inspiration. While he's filming it, it starts pouring rain. He's like, oh, this is a metaphor for my life right now. And he's very honest. He's like, I don't know. I do not know how we're going to move forward. I don't know if we'll be able to film season 2. And one of his, this is kind of like, I think there's some really spiritual nuggets here. One of his colleagues, Neil Harmon, records that at about this time, he was praying, saying, God, what are we going to do? How can we move forward? And God says, I need Dallas to do something. Now, unbeknownst to what I've been talking about so far, on July 6th, there's another guy. He wakes up and he feels an impression in his heart that he should call Elder M. Russell Ballard of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. He had done a little bit of work with Elder Ballard over some previous months, and he had actually given Elder Ballard and some other church leaders copies of season 1 of The Chosen, which was then available on DVD. He'd given a copy to Elder Ballard's secretary. But still, you don't just call, maybe you do, I don't know, Jeff, but I think most Latter-day Saints don't just wake up and think, oh, I'm going to call a member of the Quorum of the 12. So,
I was talking to Elder Bednar this morning.
That's awesome.
I'm just kidding.
So this gentleman is feeling this impression, call Elder Ballard. It keeps coming. So he calls the office. And I guess I should back up for a little context. In the month of July, most church leaders, like senior church leaders, like apostles, don't come into the office. This is their 1 month for time for family and personal affairs, which also made it really grim for The Chosen because they got to make a decision now and all the decision makers aren't available.
The days are burning away.
But miraculously, on July 6th, Elder Ballard was in his office his secretary picks up the phone and she says, "Oh, by the way, I watched that entire DVD you gave me. I love The Chosen. It's incredible. I picked out a bunch of scenes that were my favorites." And the man explains to her, "Well, we're actually stuck in filming season 2 because we need a set." She's like, "Let me patch you through to Elder Ballard." And Elder Ballard says, "Well, I got to be honest, I have not watched season 1 of The Chosen. I've been pretty busy, but let me collaborate, and maybe my secretary can help me watch a couple of these episodes, and I'll call you back this afternoon." Elder Ballard has a really powerful experience watching these scenes from The Chosen, calls the man back later that afternoon and says, "Okay, I think there's something here. Let's put our heads together and see what we can propose." And so you know how it is. You feel the Holy Ghost, you work hard, everything works out. No. They get another no answer.
Oh, wow.
And it's discouraging, but it says, there's been some changes made, and actually Bonneville Corporation is not in charge of the set due to COVID. Only the first presidency can authorize permission to use the set, and they're not available this month. So the no's are coming over and over again. Brad Pillow, who I mentioned earlier, he hears the no. Dallas Jenkins was going to be flying out to Utah on July 13th, and Brad decides not to tell Dallas this news because he doesn't want Dallas to cancel the flight. But once Dallas lands, Brad says, "Hey, this can only be approved by the first presidency. It's going to be at least a 3-week delay, maybe longer." And Dallas was so discouraged. She's like, "You know what? Maybe I should just fly back home." One of the heroes, though, of the story is Dallas's wife, Amanda Jenkins. I don't know if you're familiar with her work.
No.
She has actually Bible study guides that go along with each season of The Chosen. They're available on Amazon. She's a powerful spiritual leader. And she said to her husband, "Don't lose hope. Things are going to work out. God is just taking you to the edge of the Red Sea." So somehow, and I'm not 100% sure on how this came about, but Brad was able to arrange a Zoom because it was COVID, between him and Dallas, who were together, and Elder Bednar and Elder Holland. And as they talked, they realized that they have a lot in common. Dallas is trying to promote Jesus Christ. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is trying to promote Jesus Christ. And so they're thinking, okay, how can we make this work? And Elder Holland says, "Well, when do you really need to know?" And Dallas says, "Yesterday. Like, we gotta get this going."
Yeah.
And Elder Holland's like, "Yeah, but the first presidency, I don't know how we can get to them." And Dallas says, "You guys are the greatest door-knocking church in the whole world, like, just go knock on their door."
Well played, Dallas.
Yeah, that's right. So Dallas and Brad prepare some materials, some background information, and they send it to Elder Holland and Elder Bednar. They say, "We'll take it from here." The next day, they go back to the Goshen site. And as they're there on the site praying, they don't know how things are going to work out. It took a long time for the sun to rise that morning over the mountains. And one of the individuals who was there, she said, "Maybe we see in this a metaphor. In our lives, sometimes we're praying, we're waiting for God to come, and it just seems like it's taking a long time. Maybe that's the case here." So Dallas flies home, no agreement in hand. But the next day, Brad gets an email saying the first presidency has approved the exception. The Chosen is good film.
Wow. Do we know how the first presidency was?
I do not know if there was any door knocking. I'm not clear on that detail. But to me, this story is incredible in lots of different levels. And maybe first, let's just talk about the message of surrender and turning things over to God. If you remember, we talked about how Neil Harmon prayed and he felt the Lord say, "There's one thing I need Dallas to do." And Dallas later kind of reflects on this moment where he made the video saying, "I can't do this. Like, God, this is, I'm bringing my 5 loaves and 2 fishes, but God, I need you to fill in the rest." And I think you can see in this story, Dallas being brought to the edge of the Red Sea, not knowing that it was going to part. And for you and me, fans of The Chosen, we just can enjoy The Chosen. We don't, get into all the details. But I think, isn't that how life often is sometimes, where we already know Jesus is going to be resurrected. So when he comes down from the cross, we're already like rushing to Easter Sunday.
Right.
But inhabit it with the disciples.
Sure.
And when we're in the Saturday of our lives, when we're in the middle, do we draw closer to God or do we leave him? And I think in this case, Dallas provides a powerful example of keep moving forward in faith, and then God does part the Red Sea.
And it sounds like Dallas did so not with this unwavering conviction in his heart that, I will speak it, therefore it will happen type of thing. It was a trial. It was painful. It was very uncertain. And I mean, I can totally relate to those types of moments. I mean, I've talked about some of them on my channel. I mean, moving out here, we had a similar situation where everything fell apart at the end. But sometimes the Lord has to bring our plans to an end in order to remind us that He is the one making the plans. He is the one that is making stuff happen. I mean, we are used by Him, but I often say with our house situation, moving out to Utah and it all falling through, we didn't move to Utah. The Lord brought us out here. And I would have to imagine Dallas would say something similar. Like, I'm not making, I didn't decide to make The Chosen, but the Lord has made a way for the story of Christ to be told this way. And to the extent that the vision behind it is coming to fruition, it is reaching literally millions and millions of people around the world, which is super powerful.
And so to me, this story, and let's go back to the interfaith section in just a moment, but to me, this is a powerful model because surely either in your life or my life or someone who's joining our conversation, someone is right now in the middle. They're at the Red Sea. It's July 14th, and we still don't have a set. And to me, this story, Christ's resurrection, of course, most powerfully reminds us Jesus Christ wins. Things are going to work out. Keep moving forward.
Yeah. And I think just from the interfaith standpoint, there's something, again, really important and powerful about that because I have some Latter-day Saint friends that I converse often, even about Hello Saints. And I always go back to John chapter 4 when it comes to interfaith dialogue, with Jesus having the conversation with the woman at the well, how many ethical red lights he blew past in order to have that conversation with a woman in Samaria. And, Latter-day Saints might see evangelicals as Samaritans. Evangelicals might see Latter-day Saints as Samaritans. Regardless of how we slice it, we cannot deny that Jesus used people of not only a different faith context, but one that was very much looked down upon, not embraced, actually shunned, to make some of the most powerful statements about the heart of God, the plans of God, and how we can emulate the plan of God, how we can personify incarnationally the heart of God to the people around us by using this shunned people group that shouldn't even be conversing with one another. It seems like that's kind of how The Chosen has come together. Again, I don't know if we're the Samaritans or you are, and then sure we'd slice it differently, but we can't deny that the Lord's hand was in that, and that the Lord used very clearly convictions held by evangelicals, convictions held by Latter-day Saints to bring this to life.
Yeah.
It's undeniable. I mean, it's right there. In situations that didn't take place in one moment in a room where they were all together, but in different states across the country at different points.
Yeah.
Which is a really powerful testament to what The Chosen is.
And maybe as we kind of like wrap up this specific aspect of what happened as far as the storyline of the Goshen chat, I want to end where we began the story with 2011 in Elder Bednar's prayer. He gave a few dedicatory remarks before the prayer, and here's what he said. So this is 2011, way before The Chosen is ever on the scene. I feel to say that we seated in this tent today have no more idea about the influence for good that will come from the work that is conducted upon this set than a babe that sits on its mother's lap. This work will influence the world in a remarkable way, in ways we cannot possibly imagine now. There are elements of this set that will be used for purposes we do not yet know, and we will all stand amazed, remembering this tent, this day, this occasion. There is an influence for good that will go forth from this place that will be remarkable. And I'm not sure all of the ways that statement is going to be fulfilled, but The Chosen is certainly one of them. So then that begs a question in my mind, where we've spoken already in another episode about The Chosen, and we're alluding to it here, where there are a lot of evangelicals who will recoil at the idea that there's an interfaith effort behind The Chosen, even beyond Latter-day Saint, but even Catholics, right? Jewish, some of that other stuff. How do members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints view The Chosen? And is there
I know you can't speak for everybody,
Right.
but would you have expected there to be more pushback from church members on the show that is, from a writing standpoint and from a directorial standpoint, is coming from a Protestant evangelical view?
I honestly think that there is, and I've not done any academic studies on this, but I think there's been a shift among Latter-day Saints over the past decades. When I was growing up, I'll be honest, it really felt like an us versus them mentality. It's a very large evangelical church in the city that I grew up, a suburb of Seattle, and I had kids on the bus who would make fun of me. Clearly their pastors had taught them, like talking points, poking points to share with their Latter-day Saint friends. Mm-hmm. But in recent decades, I don't feel that sense of antagonism. Instead of feeling like an us versus them amongst Latter-day Saints versus some other branch of Christianity, I feel more of a, hey, let's have all believers in God band together, because there's a lot of negative forces out there in the world, and we need everyone working together. So I do think there, and we'll probably hear in the comments, feel free to leave them, but there are...
They do feel free to leave them.
There are undoubtedly some Latter-day Saints who think that The Chosen is, if not the work of the devil, it's a distraction from the Bible, or it's a distraction from Jesus Christ. There's evangelicals and Catholics who think the same thing. But I personally feel, let's follow the model that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints institutionally did by saying, yeah, we have some resources that we can share with The Chosen. Let's use that for the purpose of bringing more people to Jesus Christ.
Which to me, at the end of the day, is why I personally am comfortable with it, when it comes to collaboration. I think Latter-day Saints are, regardless of what it was like a few decades ago, they are ahead of the game relative to a lot of Protestant evangelicals when it comes to being a little bit less insular than maybe they historically have been. And I think the church leadership is trying to get a Latter-day Saint culture to face a little bit more outward and not always facing inward. You see this even with communications department callings in certain regions where there's interfaith individuals who are making interfaith connections and inroads with people of other faith, other Christian churches. In fact, I met with one recently that was asking, are there any evangelical churches in a specific county? I don't think they were speaking out of turn, but just in case they were, are there any evangelicals in this specific county that I'm working in that could use any sort of help? Like maybe, are there any churches that are having a hard time, like even with funding when it comes to like getting a church plant set up and stuff like that? And I was just like, oh my goodness, this is like never in a million years would have I thought that. And I think the vast majority of evangelicals would say that would never happen. And maybe there's a vast majority of church members that would also say that within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But I say all that to say the church members that I've been encountering have been very open to having conversations with people who are looking to Christ. And I would never step away from a conversation like that. And that's why I think The Chosen is so important. There's been news that's been coming out lately that The Chosen has an endpoint, right? 2027. What then? Well, there's already chatter. Well, there might be a series about Joseph from the Old Testament.
Right.
There might be a series about, I don't know if it was Moses or somebody else.
3 seasons on Moses.
All good, right? And I'm there for it. But if there's one area that I feel like all of us could and should be willing to clear the room to have the conversation, Joseph is great, Moses is great, but Jesus, like that's where I think we should be coming together and saying, let's talk this out. Let's peer into this. Let's together look at him and understand him. And again, the Chosen is not inspired. It doesn't take the place of the scriptures. At the same time, what it is producing, and I'm totally stealing this from Tyler Griffin, 100%. Okay, this is Tyler Griffin, Dr. Tyler Griffin, Scripture Central and BYU. He said that too often we fall into this trap of thinking that you'll know someone by their roots and not their fruits, right? And so here you have The Chosen. You can be like, oh, but like its roots go into like this evangelical Catholic Latter-day Saint, soil is what it's growing out of. It's like, okay, now let's look at the fruit. What is it producing? It is producing millions of people who are obsessed with seeing Jesus more clearly. I think that's a beautiful thing.
I do too.
Yeah.
Now let's talk for a little bit about, like, on a practical level, how can people use, like, this was like a broad scale example of interfaith collaboration, but there's actually been examples over the past year of smaller scale events, some that are still actually quite large, that I think people should be aware of. For example, about a year ago in the Boise area, some people got together and said, look, in our community, we've got Catholics, we've got Baptists, Seventh-day Adventists, Latter-day Saints. We all come together around Jesus Christ. Why don't we raise a little bit of money and let's hire some actors from The Chosen to fly out? We'll rent out the Nampa Center and we'll have an event. It's going to be an interfaith event just centered on The Chosen and how that points us to Jesus Christ. So I was talking with the organizer last week. He said that in one night, they raised all the money that was required. So the event was free.
Wow.
15,000 people came across 2 sessions.
In Idaho.
Again, a variety of different faiths. And this was people are just kind of, and I say this, I don't mean this in a negative way, but people are just kind of making this up. These aren't professional event planners, but they're just sitting down saying, okay, we want to do this event. How are we going to make this happen? Which actors are we going to invite? They figure it all out. And I hope if you're like a pastor in Atlanta or you're a stake president in Tennessee, like, make a comment, find a way to reach out to us. And I think this would be an amazing event to replicate, because in almost any major city around the United States, you're going to find thousands of Christians who are interested in coming together on The Chosen, and they might not want to come together and have an interfaith dialogue.
Sure.
But why not come together and celebrate Jesus Christ and our love for him?
I mean, I'm there for it. And I mean, if you really think about it, yeah, where there might be a discomfort for some congregations to maybe do a combined worship night or combined meeting with Latter-day Saints or Catholics or whatever. Okay. But I mean, if we're going to dress up like Harry Potter and go to like midnight viewings of that, or Lord of the Rings, then why don't we do that with The Chosen, right? Because
and that's why I think The Chosen could be a vehicle. Like, it might be awkward if it's like, hey, come to a devotional. It's a shared devotional. All of a sudden I feel like, I don't do devotionals at that person's church. But if we go to a high school gym, and it's not about a particular denomination, it's about The Chosen,
right,
all of a sudden we can focus. And there have been other smaller scale events done at universities. Utah State University hosted an interfaith event. I was involved in one at Brigham Young University where we put out a call for papers. I was involved with 3 other professors from other universities, one a Catholic, some Christian universities, and we brought together about 15 scholars for 2 days. We spent time together at Brigham Young University, gave public lectures, kind of as academics are wont to do,
right?
Like little scholarly papers on The Chosen, and it was incredible. So, and there's one comment I want to read. This comes from a professor who lives on the East Coast, teaches at a Christian university, and after he had come and experienced this weekend with other faculty members talking about The Chosen, he wrote me an email. He said, as a theologian with family ties and a personal history in Catholicism, Evangelical Protestantism, and the Latter-day Saints, I was incredibly pleased to discover the new avenues for interfaith conversation that an artistically driven show like The Chosen makes possible. There are, of course, deep and significant theological differences present among many of the conference's participants, but this conference made it possible for us to establish new relationships around a common appreciation of The Chosen, wherein genuinely fruitful dialogue about those differences might begin. In a time and culture wherein so many people are looking for reasons to argue and separate, it was nice to participate in something that was so clearly striving for collective appreciation of something truly beautiful. And to me, I just think that says it all.
Yeah.
This is a great opportunity to come together.
Yeah. More specifically, not just for the sake of kumbaya. The togetherness isn't the point. Christ is.
Yeah.
And that's where I think that's the difference. Because to your point, we can rally around all kinds of different causes for the sake of unity, for the sake of feeling, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that per se, but to rally around Jesus and a willingness to. I love the passage you just quoted because I quote it all the time, and I think it's key. When Jesus says, "If I be high and lifted up, I will draw all men into myself." I think that's the opportunity that The Chosen is affording so many people. And the thing I like to think about too is it's a TV show, right? That's all it is. I mean, it's more than that because it's based on Jesus and the scriptures. But at the end of the day, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, maybe our kids and grandkids are going to make fun of it because it was like some, cheesy, two-dimensional TV show or whatever. But I like to imagine what is spiritually transpiring in the heart of the people that this is really reaching. That's what it comes down to at the end of the day. I mean, how many people who were wandering and lost and confused and disoriented in life have been able to see Jesus in a new light that has brought hope and life into them that otherwise would not have been there because they probably wouldn't step foot in a church or show up at some sort of interfaith event. I think it's important what's taking place. And it leads to a question that I would have that I don't have insight into just because I'm not a Latter-day Saint. I can give my reasons as to why I think so many evangelicals are drawn to The Chosen and watch it. And those reasons namely would be because when we watch The Chosen, it is very consistent with how we understand Jesus and what we preach about and what we talk about. It's just cool to see it kind of dramatically presented. And Dallas, who's a pastor from Illinois, so am I, he's just done a really good job at conveying Christ, presenting Christ in a way that whenever I watch Chosen, I'm like, yep, that's how I view him. That's how I've always viewed him. And this is how I like to think about him when I'm preaching. Cool. Good job, Dallas. But I'm curious to know, why are Latter-day Saints, why are so many Latter-day Saints drawn to The Chosen? Because a lot of Latter-day Saints are drawn to The Chosen.
Yeah, and as soon as you say it, the research professor in me is like, wow, I need to do a survey because I can't quantitatively answer that question. But I do think just from conversations that a lot of Latter-day Saints really are drawn to the human portrayal of Jesus Christ. And as we've talked about before, Jesus is 100% divine. He's also 100% human. And The Chosen does a great job of helping us see maybe some of the human sides of Jesus Christ. Like there's this scene where his mother Mary is washing his hair. And you think, well, did Jesus's hair get dirty? Well, it probably did.
Of course.
Obviously. But this helps me see the human side. And just yesterday in one of my classes, my students and I were talking about the temptations of Jesus Christ and from Hebrews chapter 4 about because Christ was tempted in all things, we can come boldly to the throne of grace.
Yes.
A couple of students raised their hands and they were just sharing, because I know of the human side of Jesus, this helps me connect with him. This gives me faith and confidence in him. He understands what I'm going through.
Yeah.
And I think The Chosen, I think that's one thing that attracts many Latter-day Saints to The Chosen is they're connecting with a Savior that understands who they are and what they're experiencing.
It's so key. I mean, that to me is the most powerful thing about the incarnation, that God became flesh. And, I've even preached it in sermons. In fact, this last Christmas, I preached a sermon about it, that he didn't just condescend to a man, but to a boy, and not just to a boy, but to a baby, and not just to a baby, but an embryo, right? I mean, the distance traveled in order to identify with us and to show us not only his love, but the hope that is offered by his love is existence altering, right? And I think that's another reason why, even the Apostle John, he was really big on this too. In 1 John, you have this Gnostic or proto-Gnostic philosophy kind of creeping into the next generation, that maybe Jesus was just, an apparition, he wasn't actually human. And he's like, no. I love the way 1 John starts. No, I touched him. I heard him. I saw him. Like, he was the real deal. He was in human form. And us being able to identify with God, that he's not chiseled in granite in the heavenlies, stoically looking down upon us with disappointed love in his heart, right? But that he joined us and he toils with all the things we toil with is really beautiful. And that's, I think, what I myself have found to be so powerful about The Chosen.
If I can just share like a side note, because if you're still watching this episode, you're undoubtedly a fan of The Chosen. You were just talking about Jonathan Rumi. There's a miniseries called Jesus and Jonathan. It's available for free on Amazon. Kind of explores Jonathan Rumi's life and what it's like to portray the Savior. And there's a scene in episode 4 that is so powerful. At the time, this is before The Chosen has begun, Jonathan Rumi is like $800 in debt. So he's written more checks than he can cash. He's so discouraged. And that morning, he offers this prayer of surrender. And he's like, God, I'm just turning everything over to you. He comes home that day. There's 4 checks in his mailbox. And he had the prescience to record the moment. So he just takes his phone, clicks record, and he says, I'm going to open these checks. And he starts opening them, and it's a $50 check. And there's like a $200 check, and he's still in debt more than $1,000 or something. And then he opens the 3rd check, and it's $700 or about that. And he just starts weeping. And you can see Jesus Christ working on Jonathan Rumi, accepting his surrender, making him more than he was as a person. And there are several interviews that Jonathan's done where he talks about that moment of surrender being a key part of preparing him to play the role of Jesus Christ in The Chosen. And that opportunity comes along a few months later.
Yeah.
And coming back to the Interfaith, I love that story. I love watching Jonathan share that testimony. He and I don't share the exact same denominational belief, but we both believe in Jesus Christ, and I can learn from and be strengthened by his faith in Jesus Christ.
Well, and to that point, what's going to be really interesting is the show continues to play out, and then as it ends, the stories that we are going to hear from, which I'm sure are already coming out, of some of the other actors. Because one of the things my wife talks about all the time that she thinks is super cool is that some of the actors that play the disciples are Jewish, like they're actual Jewish. So they are telling a story about a Savior that they don't believe is or was the actual Messiah, but how each of these individuals are experiencing this. I was able to meet, I don't want to say who it was, but one of the, he's not one of the disciples, but he's another biblical character. And he was telling me that...
An actor in The Chosen.
An actor in The Chosen, okay. Yeah. And he's not from America, but he was telling me how he was part of a specific religious context and had left and was just wandering this earth and then found Christ just before he was cast as The Chosen. So this has turned into like this massive, immersive, existence-altering experience for him that he once was, lost in this other context and then wandering, and then once he gave his life to Christ is now able to experience entering into the story. It's just really powerful when those types of stories start to emerge like that.
Well, before we wrap up, I want to just highlight one more interfaith connection, because probably there's someone who's participating here and they're thinking, well, that's cool. I don't own a set in Goshen, so I can't help there. I'm not a leader of a church. I probably can't organize an interfaith event. So what do I do? And I just think, call a friend, just like we called each other and said, hey, let's get together and talk about The Chosen.
Yeah.
I think this would be a wonderful way to start any kind of interfaith. And it doesn't have to be a formal event,
sure,
but it could be as simple as a Catholic or an Evangelical or a Latter-day Saint inviting some friends of other faiths. Hey, you want to come over and watch an episode of The Chosen together?
Yeah.
What's your favorite scene from The Chosen? Why do you like that?
Yeah.
And just some basic conversations. It gives us this thing that we have in common. It's a bridge that I think, and I love what you said earlier. It's not just a bridge for like, oh, now we're better friends. It's a bridge to connect us with Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And I think that's what the whole point of storytelling can do and what it does. That's why everybody will sit in a dark theater and chomp on popcorn, because there's something about, sitting together with other people and hearing a story, but especially on a subject matter like this, even more powerful. And I mean, that's really how I was introduced to The Chosen. It was at a friend's house and it was Christmas Eve, and they're like, hey, we should watch this. And it turned into a really powerful and sort of reverent experience for us. And anytime we have the opportunity to share that with others, it doesn't have to be in a chapel. It doesn't have to be in a church building. It doesn't have to be in a cathedral. There are other ways that we can commune at the table with Christ when he's the centerpiece, when he's the main course, if you will. And what that can do in relationship and conversation is something super sacred. And I think it's an amazing thing that's come out of what The Chosen is producing. So, yeah.
Amen.
All right. So, John, thank you so very much for your insight, your story about how the set came about. I mean, it's super powerful. I'm glad that we get to share that with other people. How can people, again, find some of the resources that you've put together? We're going to link it in the description, but tell people one more time.
So all of the links to The Chosen, these little video clips from The Chosen are at johnhiltonii.com/The Chosen. If you go to my website, I have a master class on the Book of Mormon. I have a class that's just focused on Jesus Christ. So welcome anyone to join those. Or you could also join me on Instagram and find that person who said, The Chosen is a Mormon show. And maybe you could make a reply to him. I'd really appreciate that.
That sounds great. All right. So thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate it. If I were watching this video, I would definitely like it. So I think you should too. And if it was the first time you're watching this channel, I would probably subscribe to it. So I think you should too. So like the video, subscribe, come back for more videos like this. Until next time, we'll see you later, Saints.